Picard kept the same surprising item as Captain Pike on Star Trek: The Next Generation's Enterprise. When Star Trek: The Next Generation launched in 1987, it boldly ventured into a new century of the franchise's mythos, introducing fresh faces, a sleeker ship, and a radically different tone than the original series. Yet among the redesigned aesthetics and progressive storytelling, one subtle prop provided an unexpected link to the franchise's earliest roots. Captain Jean-Luc Picard kept the same surprising item on the Enterprise D that Captain Christopher Pike once had aboard the original Enterprise. This item wasn't a piece of futuristic weaponry or a high-tech Federation artifact. Instead, it was something charmingly mundane and deeply symbolic, a classic ship's bell. Yes, a bell. A polished brass ship's bell, something you might expect to see on a 19th century naval vessel rather than a starship navigating the 24th century. But this old-world relic made its quiet return aboard the Enterprise D, and in doing so, it became a powerful symbol that bridged centuries of Star Trek history and philosophy. A tradition that transcends time. The ship's bell first appeared in the original series pilot The Cage, with Captain Pike at the helm. There, it was a piece of decor that subtly conveyed naval tradition. Though Pike's Enterprise was a frontier vessel exploring strange new worlds, it was still modeled on maritime structures and customs. The bell was an echo of Earth's seafaring past, a visual cue that starships, like ships of old, required discipline, hierarchy, and ritual. Pike's bell was more than just an aesthetic flourish. It represented continuity and respect for the long history of exploration, from sailing ships to warp-capable star cruisers. And when Star Trek: The Next Generation premiered decades later, both in real-world time and in universe chronology, the bell's return aboard Picard's bridge was more than set dressing. It was a message. Picard, a man of culture, order, and tradition, understood the symbolism. He didn't need to ring the bell during red alerts or battle stations, but its presence on the Enterprise D was a deliberate choice. It reminded his crew and the audience that even in a future dominated by advanced technology and alien encounters, humanity's past still mattered. A captain of contrasts. At first glance, Captain Jean-Luc Picard and Captain Christopher Pike couldn't be more different. Pike, as seen in The Cage and later reimagined in Strange New Worlds, was a more instinct-driven leader, often grappling with doubt and emotion. Picard, in contrast, was cerebral, diplomatic, and reserved. He projected an image of unwavering control, until moments of passion or conviction revealed the steel beneath his calm exterior. But both captains shared a reverence for tradition and a respect for the legacy of the Enterprise name. That shared ethos is quietly reflected in the bell. Pike's bell existed in an era when Star Trek was still finding its voice. Picard's bell, on the other hand, came at a time when the franchise had matured, growing into a self-aware and philosophical juggernaut. The decision to include the bell aboard Picard's Enterprise was a quiet act of character development. It showed that while the galaxy had evolved, and the Enterprise had transformed into a technological marvel with a crew of hundreds, the captain still saw value in what came before. The bell didn't belong to the future, it belonged to the spirit of exploration. The bell's hidden moments. The bell aboard the Enterprise D wasn't featured prominently, but it did appear in key episodes. Most notably, it was seen during formal ceremonies or important gatherings, such as court-martials or diplomatic functions. In The Measure of a Man, when the legal status of Data is debated, the bell rings to signify the start of proceedings, just as it would in a naval courtroom centuries earlier. That single clang of the bell echoed with significance. It drew a line of continuity from Pike to Kirk to Picard, from Earth's oceans to the stars. It's even more poignant when you realize that The Measure of a Man is fundamentally about legacy and personhood. The episode explores what it means to be sentient, to have rights, and to carry forward the values of the Federation. That moment, when the bell rings, frames the entire debate not as a modern or futuristic dilemma, but as part of humanity's eternal struggle to define justice and morality. In that sense, the bell is like the Enterprise itself, a vessel for both travel and ideals. Gene Roddenberry's touch. The inclusion of the bell in The Next Generation likely stemmed from Gene Roddenberry's insistence that Star Trek remain grounded in recognizable human traditions. Roddenberry, a former WWI pilot and police officer, was deeply familiar with military structure and the rituals of command. He understood that even in the 24th century, captains would benefit from the symbols of leadership and continuity. Roddenberry's vision of the future wasn't about abandoning the past, it was about evolving from it. That's why the bell, books, T. Shakespeare, and classical music had a place on Picard's ship. These weren't just character quirks. They were deliberate choices meant to show that the Federation's values were rooted in a rich, thoughtful history. Picard wasn't just a starship captain, he was a steward of those values. And every time that bell chimed, even faintly in the background, it reinforced that stewardship. A connection Pike would appreciate. In many ways, Captain Pike, as he's now explored more deeply in Star Trek, Strange New Worlds, would have appreciated Picard's choice to keep the bell aboard. Pike's version of leadership included empathy, mentorship, and the weight of future consequences. Like Picard, he understood that being a captain wasn't about barking orders, it was about carrying responsibility with humility and grace. Both men also had to make impossible choices. Pike faced a tragic future he couldn't avoid. Picard faced moral dilemmas that defied logic. But each man carried out his duties with the quiet strength symbolized by that humble bell. The bell wasn't a weapon or a shield. It didn't scan anomalies or detect cloaked Romulan vessels. It simply rang when it needed to, and its sound carried the weight of centuries. Legacy and the bell's quiet farewell. By the time the Enterprise D was destroyed in Star Trek, generations, the bell, like so much else aboard that ship, was lost. Its fate is never explicitly addressed. Did it survive? Was it recovered from the wreckage? Or is it now lying somewhere in the ruins of the Enterprise D saucer section on Viridian 3, a silent relic buried beneath alien soil? Regardless, the bell's legacy lives on. It represents a quiet through line in Star Trek. The idea that no matter how advanced the technology, no matter how alien the frontier, there is always value in remembering where we came from. That's why it's fitting that newer captains, like Michael Burnham in Discovery, or even 7 of 9 in Picard, often display their own connections to the past, whether it's through old uniforms, musical instruments, or logs of those who came before. The Federation's future remains optimistic, not because it forgets its past, but because it builds on it. Conclusion: a tiny detail with titanic meaning, it's easy to overlook the bell. After all, in a show with warp cores, holodecks, and sentient androids, what's so special about a lump of polished brass? But in the language of storytelling, and especially in a universe as carefully built as Star Trek, these tiny details carry enormous meaning. Picard keeping the same surprising item as Captain Pike wasn't just a prop reuse or nostalgic Easter egg. It was a statement. A reminder that every how far,